Hi, welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes, a podcast about the Granada Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994 in various series. And it ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I am Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
Today we are looking at episode 2 in the series, which is called The Dancing Men. So we've got Cryptograms, we've got Ciphers, we've got Strange and Threatening Americans. So the show opens with a shot
from Chicago. They're from
yes,
Chicago.
from Chicago. Although, you know, in many cases, Chicago and America is interchangeable throughout the series. It's really weird.
Yes.
So the show opens with a shot of a woman pruning roses, and presumably
she's wearing. She pricks herself.
Yes.
And
she's wearing white.
bleeds and like sucks the blood out because of course she's wearing white because that's what you want to wear when you're dealing with thorny bushes. If that were me, there would be blood all over it. But.
Exactly. Well, and also, I mean, rose thorns can be very dangerous. I have heard horror stories about people who have ultimately, they get infections and have to have limbs amputated.
God.
Yeah.
Tetanus shot is up to date at least.
So her husband, we're meant to assume, is also gardening alongside her, which actually made me feel kind of weird because they're in this, they're living in a lovely manor house in the country, and what the hell is he doing in a garden?
They're play gardening.
Right. So
they actually have gardeners to attend to this.
Well, yes, exactly. And as she's turning to go inside, she sees something and then runs inside in a panic while her husband kind of gets all consternated. And
it's almost like the beginning of a horror film because
yes,
she runs upstairs, she runs into her bedroom and closes the curtains for a minute. I thought she was going to jump out them or something. And then she's
hyperventilating.
Yeah, tries to hide behind an armoire. I mean, you really feel for her.
And her husband's calling after her, and that's how we learn that her name is Elsie, because he's calling Elsie. So while she's cowering in the bedroom, her husband catches sight of these mysterious kind of stick figures drawn on the wall of the garden.
Yeah, they look like they were drawn by children. So, it could have just been that she looked at them and said, oh no, there's a child here. I am childless by choice.
See, to me, they look like semaphore.
Yeah, and that's mentioned.
Yes, it is.
That.
Yep. So next, we're at 221B. And because it's only the second episode of this series, we don't know Holmes and Watson that well. Watson's reading his paper. Holmes is looking at something in his microscope, and he's making notes. And then Holmes does his thing and says, out of the blue, "You do not propose to invest in South American securities." And then Watson does his thing. How could you know that? And Holmes, and I love this, he milks the moment by saying, "Now confess, you are utterly taken aback."
Holmes needed an audience at that moment. I'm done with my microscope and now I'm bored. The client.
Yes. Then they do the thing where Holmes, explains, and Watson says, "Oh, well, that makes sense. Easy peasy."
Well, they have a whole conversation before where Holmes is like, I'm going to explain this to you, and you're going to be like, "Wow, that was so simple." And Watson says, "Oh, no, I'm not going to do that. Go on." So Holmes tells Watson's like, "Oh yeah, of course, that was obvious." And Holmes just looks at it like, I told you so."
Yeah, he says to Watson, "I should make you sign a paper to that effect."
Yes.
Because in 2 minutes you will say it's all so absurdly simple. And normally this is where Holmes gets cranky, as we know from future episodes, when a client says, "Oh, you made it seem so simple." But today his mood is up.
Also, one more detail that I liked. He said, you didn't ask me for your checkbook, which is locked in the drawer. You didn't ask me for the key, which implies that Watson has I don't think a gambling problem necessarily, but a spending problem certainly.
Yeah, possibly he's invested in bad schemes before.
Until Holmes was like, I can't listen to you complain
No,
about
I know. Well, and yes, and conversely, Watson points out that he's in a good mood, and he's saying, no, normally not having a case produces black moods and the infernal lethargy of the cocaine bottle. And honestly,
lethargy is really something to associate with.
he meant morphine. Even Doyle must have known this. He's a doctor. But anyway, it turns out he does have a case. So, and as Holmes deduces that, Jeremy Brett goes, "Ah!"
Yes. Holds up the paper with the
yes.
in front of
So
his
what you can make of that, friend Watson? I mean, he's practically dancing.
Yes, he's a dancing man.
Right. So he shows Watson a drawing, and it's the stick figures, and he tells Watson to see what he can make of it. And Watson says, "Oh, a kid drew it." And then Holmes says that's not true. And a Mr. Hilton Cubitt is coming to present the case. And between the two of them, they discuss the fact that Cubitt is landed gentry from a very old family. And we can deduce that the husband, that Cubitt is the husband who was gardening along Elsie in the opening scene. And the drawing is a copy, we see, of what was written on the garden wall.
Mm-hmm.
And Cubitt arrives and explains that the drawing has frightened Elsie almost to death. Cubitt also says that if there's any danger to Elsie, he'd spend his last penny to protect her. And my assumption is, okay, he's got a lot of pennies.
Given the size of that house and how crammed it is with stuff.
So much stuff. I did notice that all of the chairs, they were, the upholstered chairs had antimacassars on them. So I was looking for Cubitt's like hair oil, but it's it's the 80s. They weren't putting things together like that anymore.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, there was a type of hair oil, a brand of hair oil called macassar.
Macassar, yes.
That men would put in their hair, and it would stain furniture. And so women would create these doilies and put them on the backs of furniture, and they came to be known as anti-macassar.
Yep. So Holmes asks about Elsie, and Cubitt tells the story of how they met.
It's a very long story.
They met at a boarding house in London during the Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. Elsie's American, and Cubitt fell in love. And they married in a registry office. And this is important. He says he doesn't know very much about her. And I know, on the day of the marriage, Elsie confesses to Cubitt that he will have to take her word for it that she's an honorable woman and not to ask her any questions about her life before her marriage. And Cubitt agrees, because why should he assume that his soon-to-be wife
kind of an idiot, yeah,
has an interior life or a past or anything?
She does say, I have nothing personally to be ashamed of, but don't ask me anything about my past. And he's like, okay.
I mean, at that point, I would have the clipboard out. I would be taking notes.
Exactly.
I would be like, spill. But he's lovesick. And everything's lovely. They get married. Everything's lovely until one day Elsie gets a letter from Chicago. And as we know, America is mysterious and dangerous. She looks distressed, and she throws it into the fire without opening it. And ever since, she's been really nervous and frightened. So Cubitt professes to Holmes that he wishes that she would trust him, but instead, because it's also weird, he came to Holmes, who promptly says, because Holmes is not a sexist, why don't you just ask her?
Exactly. And he's like, I made a promise, but I didn't promise not to go behind her back and violate what she actually was asking of me.
I didn't say I would.
You can't ask me anything about my past, but it's okay if you hear from a third party, honey.
Right. Right. I'm trying to find the exact quote. Hang on, let me find it. I'll find it. It was something to the effect of, yes, here it is. I do feel entitled to take my own line, and I will. Which, okay, like you were saying, I'll go behind her back.
There's also it cuts to Holmes while Cubitt is talking about how they met, and Holmes is just looking at him like, "You get the fuck on with this."
Right. I mean, and to my mind, it's like, again, a man will turn himself into a pretzel before he treats a woman like a person. So Holmes agrees to take the case, sends Cubitt back to Derbyshire with instructions to keep his eyes peeled for strangers and to make any more notes of, additional dancing men that come up. And again, I mean, Conan Doyle, he went to America. He knows better.
He's also not putting a whole lot of effort into these stories.
This is true. Yes, and he hates that people like them because they're so easy for him to write. But the English public is, and even the American public is willing to believe that literally anything could happen, and frequently does in America. So Holmes starts drawing the figures on a chalkboard. And that's when Watson points out it looks like semaphore.
Mm-hmm.
But then Holmes can't decipher it without more messages, preferably longer ones. At which point, they cut to Cubitt. He arrives back in Derbyshire and he sees more dancing men on the front door.
And his groom,
yeah,
hand is
he's early.
Yeah, he's quite insolent. Have you seen my wife? Well, I couldn't have done that.
Right. Yes. I've not been out in front all day.
This guy pays you,
I've no way of knowing. Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I was like, no, fire that man. But you know what they say, good help is hard to find. And Walker must be good at something. So Cubitt finds more dancing men on the front door. He copies them down to send them to Holmes. And then it cuts to later that night. It's clear that Cubitt's been dining alone and it's very late. And then Elsie comes in the door and she's in her nightgown with a cloak thrown over it. So she's obviously been outside. And she impulsively asks Cubitt if they can start traveling and go away. And as he hugs her in support, she catches sight of a man outside the window and she draws back. At which point Cubitt pivots with a gun drawn. And the man is gone, but there are more ciphers on the door. Mm-hmm. So he gets them to Holmes, who says that he and Watson will be out to, I keep saying Derbyshire, it's Derbyshire, even though it's spelled with an A. Or no, it's the opposite. A derby is a derby in the US, like a Yankees Mets kind of thing. It is Derbyshire, yes. So Holmes gets this message and he makes a note of Elsie's name on the chalkboard. Yeah. Why did he not ask what her name was before?
Maybe he didn't think it would be the key to, like, there was no context for the dancing men.
No, I know, but he still should have asked his wife's name. He should have asked Cubitt what his wife's name was.
I'm actually kind of surprised Cubitt didn't tell him.
Right. I mean, again,
goes into this whole backstory about we got married quickly at a registry office. Like, thank you for providing all relevant details.
Exactly. Nobody is treating this woman like a person. And if Cubitt did, he'd get to the answer a lot quicker. So Cubitt's man, Walker, hands him yet another scrap of paper with another cipher on it. Holmes is making progress on the message. He's managed to make out the word Abbas Lane, which Watson does not understand. And Holmes says he's sending a telegram to America, as if it's, you know, a single place with a single telegraph office.
America is a very small country, you know.
Right? It's like Monaco. We then see Elsie in the garden. Her hair's a mess. Her dress is filthy, and it's clear.
Yeah, she puts the messy in messy bun.
Yes. Oh my God. She's been sneaking around the bushes.
And that was when she hid a message by a bench, right?
I think so. Although I'm not sure. Because any message she has sent to this guy never kind of comes back.
Yeah.
So I don't know if she.
Well, he gets it, but it's hard to place.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to place his receipt of it in the timeline.
So, in the middle of the night, Cubitt gets up and sneaks downstairs with his gun, as you do, and he can hear Elsie arguing with someone named Abe outside. And she's yelling that she loves Cubitt, and Abe is yelling, "You're coming home." And then at that point, Cubitt shoots. And meanwhile, Holmes.
Well, we don't see what happens. We
don't.
We hear a gunshot.
We hear a gunshot. That's correct. Holmes gets Walker's message from Cubitt and solves part of the cipher. Elsie, prepare to meet thy God.
Yeah, that doesn't sound at all threatening.
No, well, I mean, they, to their credit, they both throw on their overcoats and rush outside to a carriage, at which point Holmes is handed a telegram from the Chicago police, because, of course, Chicago is America. Mm-hmm. And the telegram says, Abe Slaney, Abbas Lane, is one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. So when they get to Derbyshire, a cabbie is calling out to them, assuming they're doctors on their way to the manor. And, you know, obviously one of them is a doctor. And he tells them that they may yet be able to save Elsie, but she's for the gallows because she murdered her husband. So,
oops, we got there too late.
Yeah, they get there. And this is one thing, the house is crammed with police.
Yeah.
And a surgeon. And the inspector is shocked that the eminent Holmes has graced them with his presence. The inspector...
Yeah, it's the whole cliche of the police being hostile to Holmes. Like, we really haven't seen it.
No, we haven't seen it.
He's practically a fanboy.
Yes.
Sherlock Holmes. Oh my God, please, can I just follow you around for a minute?
Pleasure to... Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the inspector confirms that Cubitt is dead. He's been shot through the heart with a single bullet. And Elsie is still unconscious. And the
bullet that's still in her head.
Yes.
She's in bed. The housekeeper and maid found them and took Elsie upstairs, because the first thing you want to do to someone
move the body.
Is move them.
Yeah. Yep. And the inspector thinks this is a cut and dry suicide, a murder suicide. Mm-hmm. And then Holmes interviews the servants. And I love this scene. I keep kind of going back to this scene because the cook and the maid are kind of complimenting one another in the evidence that they're giving.
Yeah.
And they're saying all the doors and windows were locked. Holmes is absolutely obsessed with the fact that nobody should move anything in the house. And when they're done with the interview, Holmes...
And the inspector does say, yeah, we haven't moved anything. So...
But they did, because there's a little clip of when two of the cops are moving something back.
Quick, move it back quickly.
Right.
Before he finds out.
Exactly.
He hasn't touched anything. He only pocketed a few trinkets. It's fine.
Right. And Holmes discovers a third... Okay, so he determines that only 2 bullets have been fired. He and Watson both determined this together.
Yeah, the housekeeper said that she woke up from what sounded like an explosion. And
yes,
then
I was awoke by this
guns.
terrible bang, and explosion is the only word. And about a minute later, it was less than a minute, says the maid. There was another bang, only not so loud. So Watson and Holmes determine only 2 bullets had been fired from Mr. Cubitt's gun. But Holmes finds a 3rd bullet in the window frame. So through circumstantial evidence, and chime in here, because at this point I was like, I'm not writing all this down. A breeze suggests that the window was open, so someone, not a servant, had unlocked it.
Yeah, he's basing that on the fact that there are 3 bullets, but there were only 2 gunshots heard, and the housekeeper said that she woke from what sounded like an explosion and then heard a gunshot. So he's, once he found that 3rd bullet, surmising that there was another gun and both guns were fired at the same
time. Yes. And also that there was gunpowder that wafted upstairs. So
Yeah.
hence the breeze, but it wasn't so windy because the candles weren't guttering.
I feel like he's making some lucky guesses there.
Absolutely he is.
The wind was blowing, but it wasn't blowing a whole lot.
Well, they said, the
Okay.
servant said, we could see the candle, a light on the table, and so we came in. So he's like, okay, the candle was lit, but if it had been a strong breeze, that, but it was enough to
Yeah,
carry.
there would have been some wax streaming or something.
Yeah. So Holmes deduces that whoever killed Cubitt had been shot from the window, and as you say, figures that both Cubitt and Abe Slaney fired simultaneously, and Elsie shot herself in despair.
Mhm.
He also figured that Abe Slaney is nearby. He at first thought it was an inn, but because Slaney was writing to Elsie that he was at Eldridge's.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out Walker says, oh no, that's a nearby farm.
Mm-hmm.
So he sends Walker with a note anticipating that Slaney will come looking for Elsie. And he also he takes the time to reassure the cook that Elsie is innocent.
Yeah, I appreciated that.
I was like, yeah, that's kind. He didn't have to do that.
Yeah, and this is a time when servants were treated like furniture.
Yeah, no, beneath notice, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, I mean, this is our mutual theory that Holmes is a lovely person, despite the fact that he's
yes, obviously there are early stories where he is more than a little condescending, but the Jeremy Brett version is quite nice.
Yes. So here comes Abe Slaney on a horse, and Holmes is assuming that Slaney is armed. So the maid lets him in, and takes his hat and everything, and says, go into the library and wait, and I'll see if Elsie is home, because this is back in the day when at home didn't necessarily mean at home. It could mean you were at home and didn't feel like seeing anybody. So Slaney heads to the library and is immediately like, Holmes has a gun against his temple immediately.
The longest.
Yes, yes. It is like the opposite of Irene Adler's gun.
Yes.
It has a huge, what do you call it, barrel. And
we're not people.
He's handcuffed immediately. Slaney, I have to say, has an impressive mustache.
I was gonna say that it takes up like half his face.
Yes, and he's bald on top. So Holmes tells him that Elsie is at death's door, which she is. She's got a bullet in her brain. And Slaney starts screaming. And Holmes basically tells the room that Elsie fled America/Chicago to get away from Slaney, but he followed her and, quote, made her life a misery. And then Abe Slaney's, his fountain goes on, like he's going to tell everything. At which point the inspector is like, yeah, and this is going to be used against you.
Yeah, I feel like it's way early for those kinds of warnings to be needed.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the British version of Miranda.
Yeah, which started not in the 19th century.
Police record this shit, and they would, I mean, yes. Anyway, at which point Abe Slaney tells Holmes that Elsie's father was a crime lord in Chicago, and she was promised to Abe.
Yeah, and it was her father who invented the dancing men as the coded messages.
Yep. So Abe came to England to take her home because she's his. But
women are just property,
Right. His temper, quote unquote, got the better of him, and he began threatening her like he couldn't help himself.
Yeah, he says, "Oh, I wouldn't have hurt her, but like you sound like every abuser ever."
Yes. So they have this scene where she's pleading with him, and it is so good to see her agency.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, I want out of the whole crime family thing. I just want peace, having a good life here. At which point Slaney grabs her, and that's when Cubitt interferes. He and Slaney shoot at one another. Cubitt misses, Slaney does not. At which point Elsie shoots herself in the head. And Slaney escaped temporarily till Holmes got him. And after the cops leave with Slaney, Watson asks Holmes, "What was that note that you wrote to him?" And it just said, "Come here at once."
Yeah, Holmes hands it to Watson to
Watson and makes him interpret it. Yeah. So super simple. And we learn that Slaney,
almost elementary.
We learned that Slaney was sentenced to life in prison. He was originally going to get executed, but there was some outstanding reason why that didn't happen. I think because he didn't kill her or something. And Elsie magically recovered completely.
As you would in the 19th century when you have a bullet in your brain. Okay, sure. And there's a scene where Watson, not Holmes, Watson is explaining to the inspector how they deciphered the coded messages.
Yes.
Well, we thought that this, and and Holmes is just sitting there like, sure.
Oh, yes. And Slaney's mitigating circumstances that saved him from the hangman was Hilton Cubitt had fired the first shot. But that doesn't mean anything because Cubitt
How did they know? If
defending his mom. I don't know. They fired the same time. It must have been a distance thing. I mean,
but they were the same distance apart from each other.
This is another one of Conan Doyle's.
But the judge was bought off, and so he wasn't hanged.
Basically. Yeah, this is another one of the Conan Doyle's, like, I've stopped giving a shit now. I need to end the story. as happily as I possibly can, and the woman can't die. So, yeah, I really like this one.
Yeah, the moral of the story is stalking is bad, folks.
Yes, and also, if you find yourself stalking, get therapy. Because you're not treating a person like a person, you're treating a person like a thing.
Mm-hmm. Women are not objects.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, God. Even to this day, we don't get that. So, yeah. I continue to be impressed with Jeremy Brett's rolled R's. America. Like, he's practically Spanish.
And rolled R's are hard to do.
Yes, they are. And, as we were saying last time, his stutter probably makes him more prone to doing this as an overcompensation mechanism.
Yeah. I was noticing, I feel like I read somewhere, although I could be making this up, that we had talked last week about Jeremy Brett as Holmes posing quite
Yes.
but of course he does. And I was thinking he's probably trying to, those poses might match the illustrations from the original stories.
The Sidney Paget.
Yeah.
I did notice though, as he was going, do you remember that part where he's determining that that the two people fired simultaneously, and he goes out the window.
Yeah.
And he's doing this kind of balletic movement.
Yeah, he's trying to disturb the ground because I thought he was looking for footprints.
I did too. No, he was looking for the shell casing.
Yeah.
But again, that goes back to Brett's kind of, I don't know, I could have, like, this is what mimes do, this sort of balletic action and posing. I love watching it.
Yeah, I do too. And
nobody does it anymore.
No.
It's all
well, it is very theatrical, like something you would more expect to see
on the stage.
On a stage, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And was Jeremy Brett primarily a stage actor? Do we know?
I don't know offhand.
I'm checking right now. English actor, best known for Sherlock Holmes. Oh yeah. And remember he played Freddie Eynsford Hill in My Fair Lady, the movie?
Yeah.
He did Hamlet. Yeah, he did a lot of Broadway work and Old Vic. So yeah, he was big on stage, where you have to act kind of larger than life.
Yeah, it's because you need to reach the back seats.
Yep. I was just watching
for Holmes, because Holmes does have a very theatrical personality. It works really well.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I was watching the movie version of Wicked, and kind of that same theatricality is there because, of course, it's a Broadway musical. And these actors are making gestures that are kind of larger than life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the translation of acting from the stage to the screen is really,
it's hard. I mean,
yeah, there's a lot of like Hollywood actors who do stuff on Broadway, and it's, they either have to be coached to be more out there, or they're not reviewed well.
Yeah, I can see that.
Watson, meanwhile, is just reading his paper and
there's a point where Holmes has the longer message. He's working on the I was going to say translation, code breaking, and says, "I need silence." So Watson's like, "Okay, I can find something to do." So he sits down with the newspaper, and I think that's where there's a shot of him, and you can see him like holding his checkbook in front of the newspaper.
Yes, I was like, what the hell is that? But yes, we know.
Watson is about to do something stupid.
Exactly.
He's going to have his checkbook taken away from him
again. Yes, locked in the same drawer that I noticed the syringe was.
Yeah, they both have their addictions,
and they're in the same drawer and locked.
Mm-hmm. But Holmes has the key, apparently,
so that he can do his own addiction whenever he wants.
Exactly.
This is not.
Mine rebels at stagnation, Yes.
It's not an equal relationship in any way. I do know that, in fact, the first Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movie played with the same thing. Mm-hmm. That the two addictions were in the same drawer, and only Holmes had the key. Yes. Anything else on this episode that occurred to you?
I was just contrasting it in my mind with and I like some of the episodes of Sherlock, the BBC series.
Yeah.
What I don't like is how just unbelievably rude they have him be throughout the whole thing. And that's, I like how warm, by contrast,
Jeremy Brett is. Yes.
Like Holmes he's not obnoxious. He's not
rude
for the sake of rude. And the few times where he is rude, there's a very specific purpose for it.
He doesn't say things like, Anderson, be quiet, you're lowering the whole IQ of the whole street.
Exactly. I mean, which is a great line, but like,
But
that's
it's
Sherlock
not.
Holmes.
No, I think Sherlock Holmes has a lot more humanity to him.
Yeah.
And I really prefer the Brett one, although I adore the Sherlock one for its own reasons.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are a lot of reasons to like some of the episodes. I didn't even watch the whole of that final season.
Oh my God. Okay, so the final season, the only episode to watch is the one with Culverton Smith, who is something else in canon. But the one with
that's that Charles Augustus Milverton.
No, that's Charles Augustus Magnuson. No, this is the one with Toby Jones as the guy who's drugging his friends and family because he has a confession to make. That one is well worth watching.
I don't know if I saw that because it's not ringing a bell at all.
It is. Oh, it's the Dying Detective.
Maybe I did see that.
It's the BBC Sherlock version of The Dying Detective, where Sherlock gets himself into such a state with drugs and
right.
Yeah, and
that I remember.
And Benedict Cumberbatch does this amazing take on Henry V. Sherlock is blasted off his mind on drugs, and he's doing the let's slip the hounds of war and shooting more bullets at the wall while Mrs. Hudson's like trying to wrangle him into the trunk of her car.
Which is probably how it happened. Conan Doyle, the very early days of Holmes and Watson being roommates, and that Holmes, shot VR into the wall.
Right. For Victoria China.
Yeah, I imagine it probably went down something similar to that.
But and as Holmes as a Queen and Country man,
Mm-hmm.
he very much was.
Yeah.
And one of his clients is implied to be the Prince of Wales, who becomes Edward VII. So
yeah,
stuff to come.
Yeah, even in A Scandal in Bohemia, he had already assisted one of the great royal houses of Europe.
Yes. And I find it interesting to compare Elsie and Irene Adler, because these are both women who are acting on behalf of themselves.
Right. They're carving out their own way.
In an environment that was not particularly amenable to that. And the only way they could do that is because of the class they were in. Elsie has loads of money as a result of her marriage.
Irene, I was going to say, she certainly does now. She's also, I feel like, the best in terms of having agency and having status. The best thing to be if you're a woman in Victorian times was a widow.
Yes, early and often.
Well, I'm not advocating serial murder. You probably can
amassing wealth. No, but you're right. Then you don't have the bother of, someone hanging off your arm, like stilting what you want to do.
Yeah. But you're not suffering for being able to do whatever you want. Nobody's shunning you.
Right. Yes. And it still persists a bit to this day. Do you know the kind of trope of the elderly woman who says whatever she wants?
Yes.
I think back to visiting my mom at the residence where she was living, and it was full of women because all the men had died, and they were all saying what they wanted. And, mischievous glints in their eye because they couldn't get away with it before. Yeah.
Sarah from Smart Bitches Trashy Books.
My
podcast is called Smart Podcast Trashy Books. likes to say that you're born with only so many fucks to give, and by the time you're 40, you've gone through them all, which certainly resonates with me because it was the year I turned 40 that I just I'm done with everything.
No, it took me a lot longer. I think I was about 55. And yeah, I'm going to be 60 in June. So I haven't been without fucks for very long, but maybe I'm making up for lost time.
Feels good, doesn't it?
Oh God, I would never go back, ever. All right, should we wrap this up then? I think this is almost an hour. I think we've done good.
So the next episode is the Naval Treaty, that very exciting title.
No, but I love that one.
There's the most boring title.
There's another woman in it who's the super of the building where the treaty gets stolen. And she's got her own thing going on. I love this one. All right. So
yeah, I remember enjoying it too, but that's just like the worst title.
It is. It is. Maybe on purpose. Because if you drew too much attention to the fact that a naval treaty was stolen, then more people would be interested. No, they wouldn't. Never mind. Forget I said that. All right.
Join us next week.
Exactly. All right. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Right.
Okay.